Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University.
This week in the news, The Right Play, a great article by Kyle Mullins of the Dartmouth. Our question from a listener
comes from Cadence from the Stuyvesant School in New York, and Cadence wants to know, how do I answer the interview question? What is a weakness that I have?
Our interview is with Robert Alexander, the Dean of Admission, Financial Aid, and Enrollment Management of the University of Rochester on understanding the University of Rochester. And our college spotlight will be understanding the University of Rochester.
Dave is back. He's taking full advantage of his new monthly status. He's been jet setting all over Europe in a convertible. Tell us about it. Tell us about your trip. Treated the wife to the big birthday celebration.
Well, you know, it's been a couple of years off. We usually spent the summers touring parts of Europe, and we are back at it again with my dear wife and daughter. And we went to Vienna, Austria, the most livable city in the world. And then we went to Prague, often stated with Paris as the most beautiful city in Europe. And then we even went down to Bratislava, Slovakia, and spent a day there, all the while touring a convertible Audi A5. So it was very fun. I loved it.
See, this is one thing you don't know about Dave. He's still Dr. Lincoln Penny when it comes to buying cars. I think didn't you say you've like one time in your life dropped more than 13 grand on a car, Dave, in your life?
That's right.
Like one time. But he gives himself these splurges on vacations, and he goes all out to make up for it. So
my wife got so mad when I told the dealer, just give me the best car you got. And she was like, why are you spending so much money on a rental car? And I said, well, we're in Eastern Europe. We've got to be distinguished from the migrant caravan.
Hey, it looks like it worked. You got the wheels. You got the wheels. Well, great to have you back. Yeah. Got an exciting article today. Start out with my admissions tips. So this one comes from a student. So one thing about me is when I'm working with a student on college-specific questions, oftentimes referred to as writing supplements, I am a hard-nosed teacher. I am strict. I'm like that super hard grading teacher. Like, I know how much these things matter in decision-making process, and I really expect a lot out of my students. So sometimes it takes them like 6 or 7 drafts, but I go over a number of ways where they can get very unique information about the school that they can use, that they can apply. And I was doing that with a student, and I wish I could remember which one, because I'd love to give them the appropriate, approbation. And it was within the last 2 or 3 days, but I'm just drawing a blank. But I had a student say to me, oh, I remember, it was Josh from New Jersey. So I had a student say to me, Josh, could I use traditions? And I said, absolutely. So one of the things you can do in these essays is you do some research on the school traditions. And if you can find your tradition that has some substance, and then you can personally relate it to something about you, and you bring out something unique about you that's new about you, they'll learn about you, and you relate it to the school tradition, that can be one angle that you can take in these college-specific questions. So great tip. Like I say, I learn something every day, every session, from every student, every parent. Pretty much every listener that writes, I learn something from, and I learned something from Josh. So I add that to my list of places to get some unique intel to come at it for those college-specific essays. Good stuff. Thank you, Josh. Okay, so admissions vernacular. The word is rating inflation. So I brought you Rating Box half a year or so ago. These are forms that are filled out, part of secondary school report, where a teacher has boxes they can check, or a counselor has boxes they can check, describing the student, for example, looking at your curriculum, most demanding, and there's gradations, very demanding, average, somewhat, you see these gradations in a bunch of different categories. And so that was Rating Box. That's just the actual checking in the box. But rating inflation, Dave, is one of those things that grinded my gears when I was in admission. It's the person that puts it's grade inflation and rating inflation. It's like someone who says the student is what is one of the best ever, but then you get the same thing about 5 students, and they don't realize that now I can't trust you because of your embellishments. You're trying too hard to help your students, but you're actually hurting them. It's when you say everybody's the best ever, now I can't trust everything that you say. So
that's right.
That happens, unfortunately. I can remember 2 times in admissions when I literally had to talk to somebody for doing that and say, you're killing your students' chances because we're just discounting everything you say because there's no way in the world all these kids can be one of the best ever. So just like there's grade inflation, there is rating inflation with those check boxes.
There can only be one GOAT, guys.
One GOAT, and it's LeBron.
It's LeBron.
Don't let Dave and I get into LeBron versus Michael. So he's a Chicago and through and through. All right. So for my big number today, the big number is 45.8, and this is actually going to be a good segue into what should be a great discussion Dave and I should have. 45.8% of the varsity sports at Dartmouth are offered at less than 1 in 5 schools.
Wow, that's it.
So basically 1 out of every 2 sports, the majority of the population doesn't have a chance at producing proficiency unless they go the private route, which is ching, 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 money. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, Dave, take it away. Let us know what's going on here.
And now it's time for Hot Topics in the News.
I'm not going to call this ode to white privilege because it's really ode to socioeconomic privilege, but it really explains to people who so often get off on affirmative action that in college admissions there's multiple levels of affirmative action, and this is one of them. And this is an article by Kyle Mullins. He is the former editor-in-chief of the Dartmouth. It's a college newspaper, the oldest in the nation, and he's now writing as part of the senior editorial staff. And he writes that, quote, when college president Phil Hanlon announced the elimination of 5 varsity sports teams in July of 2020, one reason he cited for the decision was the college's desire to reduce the number of recruited athletes in each incoming class by 10%. Okay. And why did he do that? And that was because, quote, athletic recruitment taken as a whole gives an enormous advantage to high school student athletes. Now, this in and of itself may not seem to be that discriminatory because many students play sports, you might say, and what's wrong with giving student athletes a bump as you would other academic excellent students? Well, here's the problem. As a result of the lawsuit against Harvard University by an anti-affirmative action group, we've gotten access to a lot of data on what it takes to actually be admitted to places like Harvard and what the criteria is for being admitted. And what the criteria showed in Harvard was that athletes with high academic ratings and who were also athletes had an incredible acceptance rate of 83% compared to just 16% for non-athletes. But beyond this, there were obvious implications for racial diversity. A University of Chicago analysis of the data found that removing athletic preference entirely from Harvard's admission process would result in more Hispanic and Asian students and fewer white admitted students, while the number of black admitted students would remain the same. Coupled with other admission practices like legacy admissions, athletic recruiting ensures that students from higher income backgrounds who are disproportionately white are on the inside track for admissions. Now, this article goes on to give just some absolutely eye-popping statistics that even I wasn't aware of. They talk about scaling back athletic recruitment for Dartmouth sports that were not offered at the vast majority of high schools would make the admissions process fairer. And they focused on 8 sports in particular: lacrosse, field hockey, rowing, sailing, equestrian, rugby, and squash. And they said these teams are available at less than 20% of high schools. And then they further narrowed it down to 4 specific sports: rowing, sailing, rugby, and squash. If you're like me, I never knew squash was a sport. I just thought it was that thing at the side of my plate that my mom always was forcing me to eat before I could leave the table. But no.
Hey, your mom could cook, man. Your mom could throw down with the best of them. I miss her cooking.
But it was squash. But here's this incredible statistic, Mark. Those 4 sports are offered at less than 1% of high schools nationwide. And so this, Kyle Mullins goes on to argue that recruiting for these sports is extraordinarily unfair to the overwhelming number of high schoolers who lack access to these sports. And then he got up to the cost of these sports. For example, kids who play lacrosse and hockey, the parents spend an average of over $7,000 annually on their kids' involvement, and most of that involvement is not just extracurricular; it's outside the school program itself. These are special organizations and leagues that you have to get your kids into. They often require private coaching and summer sessions, very expensive. And compare that to basketball, which usually is less than $1,500 per kid. And additionally, these sports are disproportionately white, according to 2021 NCAA statistics. And here's some amazing thing. Skiing, which is offered in less than 5% of schools, is 90% white. And that's compared to something like basketball, which is offered in over 90% of schools, which is only 35 to 49% white. So what is his conclusion? Basically, he said that 83% of Harvard's recruited athletes in 2025 were white, far more than the 53% of the class as a whole. And that should blow everybody's mind who automatically thinks if you're a recruited athlete, this is benefiting African Americans or other minorities. 83% of Harvard's recruited athletes were in 2025 were white. And here's the other big stunning statistic. 46% of recruited athletes in 2022 had family incomes of $250,000 or higher, completely blowing away this notion that student athletes somehow come from this poor, underrepresented demographic. So he concludes this article by saying eliminating recruitment for sports that the vast majority of high school students never even have a chance to play would make Dartmouth's admissions process fairer for all. So let me throw this open to you, Mark. Many ways to attack this article.
Yeah, and I'm going to start by busting your chops, man. You start off with saying, I read this article, and even I found something new. So are you like God's gift to college admissions knowledge these days, man, that even you get surprised?
We've talked about this particular topic a lot.
I know. Hey, you're coming back from a high of Europe.
At these statistics, you know.
I couldn't resist a chance to bust your chop. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'm going to say is this is why I love school newspapers. This is a school newspaper article available to anybody who researches a school newspaper. This is designed for communication in the club. The Dartmouth is actually the nation's oldest college admissions newspaper. And they're proud of that.
Yeah.
You're interested, you can go back and you can read back copies and you can find out what's going on. You can get the real buzz. This would never be sent with that glossy folder to a prospective student. Not in a million years.
Right.
So once again, this is a case for school newspapers. And nowadays they're available all online. You don't know what the name of the newspaper is? Just search your school, Ohio State, college newspaper, you name it. Just search it. Next point I want to make is Dave's initial point is an important one. This really is more class than race. So I had someone approach me not too long ago, it was within a year, and they had heard that I sort of knew how to find money for people for college. And they were paying full price at an Ivy League school, one of the most prestigious Ivy League schools within the Ivy League, and they had heard that I could help find money for students. So as I started talking more and more to this family, I found out that they have 2 kids, not 1 but 2, in this almost impossible to get into school. That caught my attention. So as I listened a little bit more, I found out that both kids had been fencing since 6th grade in the #1 fencing program in their state. And I knew right away, okay, that's your ticket. There are some people who believe that you're not getting in these schools these days without some hook, some institutional priority that appeals to the school. They're just that competitive that when they have to pick, they're going to pick and choose people that meet unique niche needs that they have. And athletics, by and far, is the easiest way to get into one of these places. And the question is that fair? Well, athletics is valuable, and it does bring extra benefits to a community. I believe that. But the question is, have we gotten to the point where the admissions clout that you're getting exceeds the value that you're bringing? And I would argue that you are.
Absolutely.
I think part of the value comes from name awareness. There's no question that's valuable to a school. But how much name awareness are you really giving your school if you're out crewing? If you're running cross country, and I don't mean trying to pick on certain sports. How much name awareness are you really giving to your school? Some of the value comes from bringing the whole community together to watch an event and have a shared community experience. That doesn't happen in a lot of these individual sports, these exotic sports. Now, back to the sort of class race issue. So, what I never mentioned was, I guess to make that point on class, the person that had the 2 kids in with fencing was a person of color. So that shows it's more class than race. However, because family income is disproportionate racially, it does end up creating a racial divide. So it's not like the same strategy couldn't be employed as it was in this instance by a person of color. But because there's so many more resources, and that's obviously true for historical reasons, just study history, that it creates a racial disproportionment within the student body. And the biggest challenge I have with that is that's so disparate from what the noise is out there, right? That's what makes it so discordant. Like, all the noise is that people are, like, these overwhelming large numbers of people are getting into these schools through racial preferences.
Right.
And without even getting into whether or not you think racial preferences is appropriate or not, the numbers just belie the facts.
Yeah.
And there have been several books that have been written on this exact same topic. And I would argue, Dave, that this isn't even affirmative action. The concept of affirmative action is not that you have an easier path if you come from a certain group. The concept is schools are going to take literally affirmative actions. They're going to proactively use different ways of recruiting to attract hard-to-reach components of their student body. That's the idea. And so whether it's a fly-in program or it's a summer bridge program or you're going to target through student search underrepresented groups, and you're going to pepper them with mails and emails and opportunities to come and meet us at this hotel and hear this presentation. Those are like affirmative actions. Here we're talking about a lower standard for people that are already privileged. And you have to ask yourself, is the value that they're bringing to the school justified by how many spots you're actually taking up? And I commend Dartmouth for curtailing it. I commend them from saying no. Because the thing about it is, these are schools that are old, that have tradition, that have alumni, and that have grandparents that give a lot of money. And I remember back in 1952 when I was in the equestrian, blah, 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 I'm taking Dartmouth out of my will. Like you're going up against that type of backlash. So I commend them for challenging that, because many a person has lost their job by taking on powerful members of their constituency. But I think one of the points that the article brings out is, there's a path a lot of people are taking to get into these schools, that does not have anywhere near the level of competition that the average path does.
Correct.
2 quick stories. A colleague of mine, another associate director when I did admissions, and her daughter, we used to talk all the time about different things. And her daughter actually was fantastic. She went off to Brown University. She would hang out with a lot of students at Brown in the Hamptons, their vacation homes. And I remember her telling me, how is it that almost all of the people in the Hamptons are at these Ivy and Ivy peer schools? And then I had almost the same conversation, Dave, this week with somebody else who works in the Hamptons, and was saying almost all these kids are at these schools. And the reason is because this is the angle that they're playing to get in. And so while you have all this communication out here about how hard it is to get in certain schools, there's another group of people that are playing by a completely different playbook, singing to a totally different hymnal, that are literally doing sports that 1% of people are doing.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, it's not that competitive for them, because if you start at an early enough age and you're even an average athlete,
correct,
you're in.
Correct. So I want to add a couple of things to that. First of all, we do want to emphasize the distinction between Division I sports of the big three, football, basketball, I'll include hockey and baseball, and these other sports, as to the revenue that they bring, the revenue and prestige that they bring back to the school. It's unquestioned the value that Division I football has for schools. Forbes did an article several years back that estimated that the University of Alabama football program was worth over $1 billion to that school. And that's why these coaches, quite frankly, are worth $5 to $10 billion, because they literally bring in hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue to these schools that's distributed throughout the whole schools and programs. Also, you can look at what happened to not just University of Alabama, how they used football to increase its prestige, but you look back at the rise of USC, to really an Ivy League caliber school, and I would argue that one of the things that precipitated it was those 3 national championships that Pete Carroll brought to that program in the 1980s. Remember that with Reggie Bush?
Well, yeah, but Dave, you could even go farther back. I mean, Duke and Georgetown were significantly elevated by the basketball success under John Thompson and under Coach Krzyzewski. It took their cachet to a whole different level. And other things come with that: alumni donations, national prominence, name awareness, and then bringing the community together. So we're not painting all sports with one stroke of the brush.
Correct. And then the other thing I want to point out is, we're not saying that it's wrong to have these sports. It's not even saying it's wrong to actually recruit these athletes to a degree. But it is that matter of a degree. I'm not against squash. I'm not against fencing. I'm not against horseback riding or skiing. Not all power to you. The question is, should they have more impact on the recruiting decision than a kid who's good at the chess club or a kid who's
Right.
actually doing Dungeons and Dragons. Because I bet you
Yeah.
there are more kids playing Dungeons and Dragons than there are
There
currently
definitely
in
are. There
squash.
definitely are.
So it's a matter of balance and perspective. And I think what this shows is that there are certain factions in the university admission system, the alumni being one of them, that have maintained an undue influence on these sports in order to perpetuate a certain socio-economic strata being given preferential treatment to admissions and perpetuating a certain legacy. And that's all we're saying. And also, you know, to take the stigma off the minority, underrepresented, lower socioeconomic athlete. Those are not the kids that are filling up these schools' programs. 83% of Harvard's recruiting athletes are white, and the vast majority of those are from incomes of over 250,000. That's the fact. So, we have to, it's a bit of a clarity moment, and admissions, you know, you've often said creating a class is social engineering. It's just about where you put your importance and your emphasis. And I think the point of this article is, hey, we're not saying get rid of these sports, but maybe it's time to de-emphasize them, to take away some of that prominence, to do a rebalancing if we truly believe in the goals of a broader socioeconomic spectrum for our college classes.
No, I agree with everything you said, Dave. There's not a single thing there I would object to. I would also add that nothing is wrong with you as an applicant, a potential applicant, doing a little work to find out how many spots are athletes getting at these schools, what percentage of spots are going to them, from two perspectives. One, to assess how much your chances may be diminished if you're not in that bucket, but also as a reflection of the values of the school. And you may love that. You may love that they're prioritizing all these niche sports, or you may not. But that is a value. It is a value statement when you give, slots to so many different sports, whether you like it or not. And I ran track in college, but I don't like, I was a triple jumper, and I loved it. I love traveling around to different universities. I love competing. I love being part of the team. And I was a walk-on. I was not a scholarship athlete, but honestly don't feel that I deserved much for that. Maybe a little something for my time, because it is a huge time commitment. But I should not have gotten an extra thumb on the scale, because how many people, quite honestly, were coming out to watch me triple jump, even in the Big Ten championship? Which we hosted at Michigan State my freshman year. Still was not tons of people in there for the Big Ten championship. So I think that's a factor. But I think you said it well, which is the perception of who is getting in is so different than actually who is getting in through athletics. And that's what makes this an important article. Here's one other thing I want to mention. There is momentum going against this, Dave. Just like you're seeing pushback on racial preferences, just like you're seeing a lot of pushback on legacy admission, these schools are under more scrutiny than I have ever seen them be under right now. And part of it is coming from students. This generation of students demands fairness in a way that others don't. Stanford dropped a number of sports recently. A number of sports they dropped for the same reason. And you can imagine as these acceptance grades get lower and lower and lower, they start going under the microscope. Well, who's getting all these spots? Yeah. And then the Rick Singer thing definitely did not help the case for athletics.
Anytime you can fake a video and not even have the due diligence to figure out, has she ever even peed on that in a boat?
Yeah. That definitely caused greater scrutiny. I'm sure there's some people cussing him out. But so I think that to me, there's a good news story here, which is a lot of schools are taking a fresh look at how many spots they give to athletes. And whether or not the justification is there for what they're actually bringing to the community to reserve a spot or to give undue admissions preference. That was just the way it was done before. Now it's under the microscope. People are being held to account. They're being asked tough questions. I personally, and Dave and I personally do believe that too many slots are going, especially at smaller Division I schools and then D3s. D3s are some of the worst because of the fact that they're so small. When you actually look at the percentage of kids that play sports, now it's important to make this distinction. The number of people that play sports is not always the same as people that got an admissions bump. So typically you'll see about 10% actually got an admissions bump through their athletics, but there may be 25% or even 30% in some cases that are athletes. And listen, another thing, we can't have this conversation without saying this. A lot of student athletes are fantastic students.
Yes, they are.
Fantastic students with really high GPAs. Because if you think about what is one quality that is absolutely essential to be a good athlete, and it's absolutely essential to be a good student, it's discipline. You know, it takes discipline to discipline your body to do that, and it takes discipline to get your butt to the library when there's a great party going on. And so a lot of times, grade point averages for students are extremely high. A lot of times, academic profiles are extremely high. So just like there is a danger in assuming that, oh, this athlete is this underperforming student of color who used athletics to get in, there's also a danger in assuming that this athlete is not a competent, capable student. Because at these smaller schools, actually, normally a higher percentage of people on the teams really were strong enough to get in just on their own. As I talk to schools, I'll usually hear about numbers like 10 to 12% got an athletic bump, even if a quarter to 25 to 30% of our students are athletes at the school. And so that in of itself makes it important that we don't just stereotype and say, you know, okay, I know the deal. You were underqualified, but you had a sport. And so it's important for us not to judge. Thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, and I want to emphasize that nuance. According to the article that I quoted, the Harvard data show that athletes with, very important, high academic ratings. Okay, so we're not talking about athletes who have mediocre scores. Athletes with high academic ratings were pretty much a shoo-in. But the point is, you had to have those high academic ratings and be an athlete. And by the way, you know, you just can't play squash. You have to be pretty darn good at it. And even though the competition of squash is not the same as basketball or football, it's not insignificant. So yes, all that is to say that we're not saying that there should be no advantage, but I think we need to look at the amount of advantage and maybe do a rebalancing, especially if the entrance to that particular sport is so socio-economically steep that less than 1% of kids have even access to playing. Well, we have to really look about why are we including that as a criteria distinguishing that kid from all the rest.
Friends, while editing this discussion, there was one thing I never said that really dawned on me when I was editing, and I want to take this opportunity to say it here. Athletes bring a lot of value to colleges. I mentioned in a conversation with Dave that they bring discipline, which is highly correlated to strong academics, but they're also highly motivated. They're also mentally tough, and they're also interesting and unique. And colleges are always looking for kids who are interesting and unique. So they are bringing more to the community than I feel I emphasized when Dave and I recorded this. Yeah, and there's something else that's important to mention. You know, a lot of times people think of sports. They think of your main varsity team where you represent the college and you travel. Maybe you even go cross country. Maybe there's even some airfare travel involved. And then they think of intramurals where anybody can play. There's almost no cuts. You sign up. Maybe it's your dorm against another dorm. what a lot of people don't realize is there's something in between at a lot of schools, and it's called club sports.
Correct.
And club sports can involve you traveling out of state to compete.
Yeah.
And the reason why I say this is because one option, and this is what Dartmouth has done, this is what Stanford has done. They've taken several of the sports and they've just moved them to club. They moved them to club. And so now you're not, there's not varsity competition against other schools where you're the main representative. There's no admissions spot saved for you. But if you really love your sport and you want to do it, most of these schools are providing avenues for you to do it. Another thing that I want to say is that while it's true that men's basketball and men's football drive most of the athletic budget that pay for all these sports, there are exceptions to that. There are places where hockey is a big revenue generator. There's places where baseball is. There's places, obviously UConn being the biggest example, but you look at places like UConn and Notre Dame and Baylor, Stanford, there's places where women's basketball is a big draw. And so another thing we're not saying is that these couple sports are the ones that in and of itself, maybe just because of who they are, warrant more an extra thumb on the scale, to use that term. It's really a matter of you looking at your own institution and saying, okay, is there a sport that is literally driving name awareness, driving revenue, funding, pulling our, we're getting thousands of people to come out and watch. And if you've got a sport like that, it could be rodeo, it could be equestrian. I mean, I don't know an example of that, but the point is, there are objective metrics and ways of looking at what value is being brought here. It's not, Stuck, you like basketball and football, that's why you're saying that, No, there are some objective metrics that you can use out here, and there will be a little variance because there's places where women's basketball is a money maker, and places where baseball, and there's places where hockey. Look at Denver. Denver's even lacrosse. I mean, they won national championships with lacrosse and basketball. But lacrosse and ice hockey. But that's an exception. Well, I think we've covered everything, Dave. Want to put a bow on?
I think so. I think that's great. The last thing I would say is, we were in the Tiger Woods generation where after Tiger Woods came out, everybody thought that they were an Earl Woods and they're trying to get their kid to be the next golfer, great golfer, or sometimes parents try and game the system and force their kids into these niche sports because of that. Beware, parents. Make sure your kid loves what he's doing. Make sure that this is his program, not your program, because that could often backfire as well, that you spend a whole lot of money and time in a sport the kid isn't interested in. And even if it does get him to where he wants to go, the cost benefit is that there could have been something that they would much rather enjoy doing. So,
actually, Dave, I'm really glad you end it with that.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you end it with that because I see a lot of that.
Yeah.
I see a lot of that. Like if parents can figure out, oh, wow, snap. Like fencing can be my hook. Equestrian can be my hook. Polo, water polo or polo, skiing, all these different things. Like, let's get the best trainer. Let's get the best, and then like if the kid doesn't like it.
That's right.
The best case scenario, they're signing up for misery for college for 4 years and not having a good college experience.
That's right.
The
analogy for our generation is, Mark, don't force your kid to play piano.
Yeah, exactly. I tell you, World War III existed with my mother and I over forcing me to play piano. It took 5 years of wasted money before I finally won that battle. I was a bad kid. I should have just listened to her. But
hey, look, Caribbean immigrant parents always felt that the key to culture was making your kid into Mozart. Didn't work. Then along came rap, and we're like, no way, baby.
Hey, listen, Dave, great to have you back. And I know next month's 5 weeks in the September. There's 5 Thursdays, so we'll get Dave twice back to back, and we'll be almost like old times, man. But good to have you back, my friend.
Good to be back.
And now it's time for a question from one of our listeners.
Friends, I'm here with Lisa, and Lisa just bequeathed some great news on me about Marshall. Why don't you share it with our listeners?
I'm excited too. So I ran into Marshall Gentry today at the school, and I told him how popular his episodes are and how helpful they've been. And I mentioned that Mark had kind of already promised that he was going to do a Zoom in June without asking him. And he said, "Oh, I would love to help. That is fine. I will do as many Zooms as you want." And he also told me, like, I know lots of things. So if you guys need help on any other topics that I know about, I'm happy to come back. So
and I said to Lisa, we are going to take him up on that offer.
Absolutely.
Not only the June, but think about it. As someone who was a dean and high-level leadership in student life at 3 different but outstanding schools, Tennessee and Connecticut and Vermont, there is a lot he could talk on.
Yeah.
And I think that this, to me, like, we are trying to put a little bit more emphasis on excelling in college. We know that hour did not tap all of that wisdom in that brain.
No, it did not. Yeah. So
now I've got another challenge, Lisa, which is to see if we can get him back in. If he's going to be on in June, I would say probably January, February would be good.
Mm-hmm.
And I would follow up and ask him what are some other topics that he didn't address that are important for somebody going off to college to know.
I will certainly follow up with him.
And then we'll have part 3 of the Marshall interview. I'm already excited about it.
Yeah. And it's great for me too, because if you go into his office, he showed me that everyone that goes into his office gets a piece of chocolate candy. So, I can
some chocolate.
I can stop by, ask the question, and get chocolate. It's win, win, win. So it's all good.
And you're a new parent at a new school, and it's kind of a good introduction to a lot of people there to
yeah,
come in
everyone's been really, really nice and welcoming so far. So it's been a great experience.
For you. Awesome. Well, today we have a couple questions from a student. Take it away, Lisa.
Sure. So these are questions about interviewing, and they come from Cadence, who goes to Stuyvesant, and she has 2 questions. And this is a great question that I always wonder about. Her first question is, how do you answer the question about when the interview asks you what your weaknesses are or what you need to improve on? How do you answer that without shooting yourself in the foot?
Yeah, and this is a great question she asks. Lisa knows this, but I really enjoy doing interview prep. It's one of my funnest things to do, actually. I've done 4 sessions this week already. And I usually take people through 25 to 30 questions that are frequently asked. And we focus on the ones that throw them off. And this is definitely one of the 4 or 5, that it's like, ooh, that's a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand why. This is also a question that can be a little tough for employees.
Yeah.
This is that common question you get asked as an employee, looking for a job. And so there's a couple things with this question. One of them is you have to have a certain level of transparency. You can't say, when I say nothing, I don't mean not answer the question nothing, but here's the example I like to give people what you can't say. You can't say, I got my driver's license at 16. The freeway around the corner from us has a 55 mile an hour speed limit, and a few times I've gone 57. Like, you can't say that, right? Like, okay, like, really? What about 56? Is it 56? You're losing sleep over 56? So you can't say nothing. I call that nothing. But it is true. I'm not going to pretend that you can't say something that would be injurious to your candidacy. All right? I mean, obviously, in extreme, I'm a mass murderer. Nobody would say that. But here's...
Well, somebody probably would, Mark.
Yeah,
I'm sorry to say that.
Actually, as crazy as this society is
yeah,
getting,
somebody probably would. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I fantasize about bringing an AK-47 to school.
Right, yeah.
But here's the example I usually give that you can't say. You can't say, well, my weakness is that I hate people. Like, that's not a good. Don't
be that honest, right?
Yeah. So So there is a balancing act there that you are trying to pull off between one, always being authentic, and two, sane enough so that somebody feels like, you showed me a little bit transparency, and not shooting yourself in the foot. The other thing I say is this question, part of this question is designed to test how well you can think on your feet too. It's partly designed to that. A lot of the questions are designed to see that. How well do you think on your feet? Now, before we get into, some of the things that, you could say, one of the things I like to say to students when I'm prepping them is there may be a time when you are just stumped by a question. And it's the worst thing in the world because there's this awkward silence. And the longer it gets, your face is flooding red. In the back of your head, you're thinking, oh, my goodness, I've blown it. And it just gets worse and worse and worse. I remember one time, Lisa, because, when I did boarding school admissions, we interviewed everybody. That was part of what admission officers did. So I remember one time there was a silence there. It must have gone 75 seconds. And that's a long time.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's very long.
75 seconds? That's really long. So what I tell people is if you do get thrown off, and this answer applies to not just this question, but any, a really good answer is to say, would it be okay if we came back to that question? That's a really good way to handle that, because what happens is your mind does have the ability to think about the next question while also simultaneously going back and thinking about that previous question. So that's just a little tip. Now, I find most of the time when people do it, people do come back. So if you think, oh, I know how to get rid of that question, I'll just say.
Yeah, just and then they'll forget and it never happened. No, that doesn't work.
That certainly happens, but I find more often than not, because I like to follow up after interviews, more often than not, I find that they do say they came back to it. So then what is the answer? Well, there's not one answer. There's myriads of answers. You would just ask yourself this. One, is it authentic? Two, are you showing enough transparency so that it doesn't feel as if, really? That's what you've got for me? That your answer is that 2 times in the whole year you were late to chemistry class? Like, come on. You got, you got to show a little something. And then you don't want to go to the extreme. And there's just so many answers that fall in there. I like to ask the student and let them prompt it, come up with it. What are some things you think? And, they're always so concerned. Well, can I say this? Can I say that? Can I say this? Can I say that? It's not about one precise answer here and there. I don't even know if it's worth, I guess we could talk about some examples that come to play that could be, it's always helpful to have examples. Examples of some things that students say that are appropriate is, I take my academics really seriously, but sometimes I'm hard on myself. I'm a little hard on myself if I don't, and then fill in the blank. I wouldn't put it in the context of grades, so you come off with a grade grubber. I would say, like, sometimes I'm really hard on myself if I don't get straight A's. I wouldn't say that, but I would say, I'm sometimes hard on myself if maybe I didn't prepare as well as I know that I could have, because I take my academics really seriously. I'm not telling people to say that answer, because there's literally tens of thousands of answers that could be appropriate. I just think that having an example of something where you show a little something, like, you could even say something like, I used to be that person that was really, really shy and I never really spoke up in class. I've gotten a lot better and I speak up way more than I used to, but I'm not always consistent. Like, sometimes I'm not. And in some classes, I speak up way more than others. I think I do a good job in my English class and in my French class. But I don't speak up as much as I should in my history class. Something like that. Or you could say something like, I'm trying to get to the point where I'm just completely self-motivated for everything academically. But I still find that if I really like the teacher, I'm going to go way more above and beyond. And if I don't like the teacher, sometimes I struggle. Like, once again, I don't want people to think these are the answers to the question. I'm just trying to give examples of things that fall within that realm of not, come on, seriously? You're going to tell me that your weakness is that you never had perfect attendance? Come on. Like you got to show me a little something here,
Yeah.
because it's also like personal statements, one of the really things that makes personal statements that shows a little magic is transparency. Transparency and a little bit of vulnerability is very powerful. And it's same is true in an interview question. Like you do want to show a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of transparency. Go ahead, Lisa. I've been talking a while. What are your thoughts?
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, I guess I was always told about this question. This advice goes back, 30 years, is try to make your weakness also kind of a strength, like something you're either working on, shows you're trying. I mean, it kind of has to be a cute problem, right? It can't be like, I just don't get up for class ever,
Right. Right.
But it's just something like, well, I'm a little perfectionistic, that can make it hard for me to work in group projects. Sometimes I'm really trying to work on it and improve that so that I don't impose my perfectionistic standards on other people or things like that, just that shows like you obviously really care about school. You really care about the work, but you're still a human being. You're not a machine and you're trying to improve in some sort of way.
Completely agree 100%. Like that's a great answer. That's an conversation we often have. Just even earlier today, I was having this conversation in some prep and this came up and I liked the answer the student proposed, which was, I'm very competitive and at times it's really good. And then she gave an example of how it can be really, really good. But at times it's not as good. And then she gave that example. And sometimes that strength can be a weakness. Now, the thing about that, and I told her this, I said, if you're going to use the competitive one, don't use it as in a sense of it is the opposite of collaborative. Don't make it sound like I'm not collaborative, because schools tend to like collaborative. Don't say like I don't like working in groups because I'm so competitive and just individualistic. I wouldn't say that. I would talk about more, how your competitive instincts are what drive you and they fire you up and allow you to accomplish a lot. But there's a downside to it as well at times. And so I agree with you 100%. Going with the strength, starting with it can be a strength, but at times taken to an extreme, it can be a weakness. You could literally say, one of my strengths is I love creative writing. I just love it. It's just something I do, but it's not good if you're doing it in class when you're supposed to be
like doing your thesis on, the American Revolution or something. Yeah. Right.
Exactly. So Cadence has another question. You want to go to it or anything else you want to say on that one? Do you think we covered that one enough?
I feel like we had. I mean, I just think basically, I think they're trying to see if you have some kind of insight, about yourself, but also that you have confidence about yourself, and truly confident people can admit imperfections, right? Insecure people cannot admit imperfections. And so you want to try to appear confident and well-adjusted.
I agree 100% with that. And that kind of goes back to what I said, sometimes it's a question to see how well you think on your feet. I would say it's a question sometimes to test confidence. It's a question sometimes to test self-awareness and all of those things. And so how you answer is almost as important as what you say.
Right.
And if you, and then also not just confidence, but also a little bit of humility too.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So no school or employer likes to feel like somebody feels like they have everything together.
Yeah. Oh, nobody likes that.
Yeah. So I would say it's like a combination of everything from confidence to self-awareness to thinking well on your feet to some, transparency. All of it kind of is all wrapped up there together. And so don't overthink it is part of the messaging. Don't overthink it, because sometimes, and I see this when I do the prep, people will say what's the answer to that? There's thousands of answers to that question. It's not and that's why I almost hesitate even to give examples here, because I want people to take it as, oh, that's the answer. No, it's not. It was just an example of one possible answer.
Right.
Friends, Lisa and I will continue this conversation on episode 253 when Cadence from Stuyvesant in New York answers the asks us to answer her final question about interviewing.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, hopefully you heard the first part of my interview with Dr. Robert Alexander, the Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid and Enrollment Management at the University of Rochester. I think it's a really important interview because it's a very important school. I loved Robert's candor, and we just continue the conversation. We talk about a lot of things in part two. One of the things we get into is the admission process, amongst many other things. Listen and enjoy. You know, Robert, I've always been fascinated by you've got a BSMD program, Rochester Early Medical Scholars, and then you've got these partnerships with liberal arts and science schools, have these early assurance programs. And I'm oftentimes referring these because I work with a lot of students that want to be doctors, and they're attracted to these programs like that have some sense of assurance that they'll end up on that path. Talk to me about the process and profile for your Rochester Early Med Scholars program, which I know is very competitive. And then talk to me a little bit about these early assurance partnerships that you have with the Haverfords and the Swarthmores and a bunch of other schools that have really strong undergraduate, biology, chemistry, biochem, and pre-med training.
Yeah, I think if you can't tell already, the university writ large, including the med school, really values students who understand the liberal arts approach to education and a very humanistic model to medical education and practice. So it's not an accident that many of the top liberal arts colleges in the country are part of that early assurance program. But we also value diversity. So you'll also see Spelman and Xavier on that list as examples of places where we want to make sure that we're cultivating some access to our med school for historically underrepresented groups.
And those are two great ones for producing doctors. You picked two good ones, really good ones right there. Now, I have a question about those. If I believe at one time students that had a 3.3, were pretty much, I won't say guaranteed in, but pretty much. And I think maybe it's a 3.5 now, if I remember correctly. But talk to me, like, how airtight is that? Like, if students go there and get the GPA, are they pretty much assured of the spot, or is it way more than that? That's just the minimum barrier to entry, and you need to have so many other things to get that spot.
Yeah, I think those early assurance programs are a little bit variable from school to from college to college, and often conditional on almost an early decision kind of mentality. So their acceptance is withdrawn if the student applies to another medical school for some of them. I know for Spelman that's the case, for example. And really, the selection criteria involve things like 3.6 or above, some letters of recommendation, relevant clinical experience, enrichment, research, etc. And for some students, it can be a waiver of the MCAT. But again, that varies.
Yeah, and I've seen that, and I think you guys do a good job of spelling out what that criteria is pretty explicitly so that there's no surprises. I guess what I'm really asking is if somebody has your clearly objective metrics, that are delineated, on websites and things like that, how often are those students admitted?
Yeah, I think they're exactly the kind of students that we want. So I think that is a pretty consistent and regular occurrence. But I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak in hyperbole here, since the dean of med school admissions is really the expert on that.
Sure.
For the native Rochester students, the early medical scholars program, those are students that we are selecting with involvement from the dean of admission from the med school and a director of that program who is himself a professor and practitioner, a neurosurgeon. That is a really unique program. and I'd love to talk more about that. So the Rochester Early Medical Scholars Program offers what really is an early action kind of approach. So we're highly selective for students coming straight out of high school with typically near flawless academic records, plus extraordinary research, shadowing, and clinical experiences that really demonstrate they are fully aware of what a commitment to a pathway as a physician will entail in their lives. And it's a program that attracts, thousands of students who are interested every year, whittled down to 50 students or so who actually go through a very intense interview process and are ultimately selecting around 10 students a year who are guaranteed admission to the University of Rochester School of Medicine and Dentistry. And what it really allows that student to do then is broaden their undergraduate experience without the pressure of thinking about, will this boost my competitiveness for medical school? So typically, those students are completing all of the normal pre-medical requirements during their undergraduate years, but also doing so much more. They're incredible students, but I also always want to reinforce that the vast majority of our successful pre-medical students who go off to med school, whether here at Rochester or Ivy League med schools or their state medical colleges, don't come through that early medical scholars pathway, right? It's such a small program, and by design, a very small program. The vast majority come through as normal admits and still have plenty of opportunity to not only take the courses, but also do the research, to literally walk around the corner from the undergraduate campus and be on the medical center and med school campus to do that shadowing, to do not just research in our undergraduate laboratories, but also the medical schools, laboratories and clinics. And I think that is what really propels them to, outstanding and more than double the national average med school acceptance rates, even if they're not in the early medical scholars program.
Fantastic. Now let's talk about merit scholarships.
Yeah.
You alluded to them before and said, they're accessible to international students. I know UR is known for merit funding. Are applicants automatically considered? What criteria are used? And talk about the range of merit scholarships that you offer.
So at Rochester, one of the ways that we think about diversity is socioeconomic diversity. And frankly, there are jobs that I considered out there at other places that meet full demonstrated need for students, but only offer need-based funding. And what happens at most of those highly prestigious places is you end up with a very bimodal distribution of students. You have very, very wealthy students whose families aren't going to qualify for any need-based funding and can pay the full freight and just write the check. Then you've got very high need students who are getting nearly full tuition scholarships at the other end of the socioeconomic spectrum. But at those places, I've had presidents, vice presidents for student life, even advancement officers ask me, why is there so much strife on campus? Or how come so many of our alumni aren't interested in giving to us to support these needy students? Well, when you completely miss the middle class, I think you end up with the quote unquote haves and have nots staring at each other across a chasm, or in this case, a quad, with very little common ground. So at Rochester, the use of merit scholarships for those students who come from families that aren't going to qualify for need-based aid, but still can't legitimately be expected or envision writing a check for the full cost of education, it rounds out the shape of our student body. It's truly inclusive for middle-class families to be able to send their kids to Rochester. And it creates a student body that, again, is much more balanced, where we are more representative of what the country looks like. And I think we're really proud of that. So that's the way that we are utilizing our merit scholarships. For the last 10 years or more, Rochester has been test flexible. So we haven't been using merit scholarships to drive up test score averages, or become more highly selective in some way. We're really using it as another means of access and opening up the Rochester experience to those middle class families who have so long been, who we are. I think our alumni really appreciate that as well. We have donors who want to make sure that their generous gifts go to support both students with need, but also some of those middle class families who aren't going to qualify for need, but will require a merit scholarship to be able to afford Rochester. They range from a few $1,000s up into the nearly half tuition kind of range. There are many students who will qualify for some merit scholarship plus some need-based scholarship, and they need not apply for merit. They do have to apply for all of the need-based funds. And then we have one very special leadership scholarship that also really requires some need and a really unique special circumstance. So it's called the Handler Scholars Program, named for the parents of our current Board of Trustees chair, Rich Handler. And Rich helped us create this program that takes students who, again, have the academic horsepower, but have already really bucked the odds in life and overcome some pretty tremendous challenges. We've had plenty of students who've been without homes in the past, some who've been through some really traumatic physical or mental health challenges with them or with a very close family member, students who have been undocumented, and the financial support for them. So that is a scholarship where those students are nominated by a school counselor, by a teacher, or even by a member of our admission team, because they're so uniquely suited and have already demonstrated a extraordinary level of resilience and readiness to really utilize, to take full advantage of the kind of experience that Rochester can give them if they're provided full funding.
You definitely have your finger on the pulse of a problem, which is a lot of families that do not qualify for need-based financial aid, but can't pay $70,000, $75,000, $80,000 after taxes. And a lot of times they'll go and they'll hear presentations and say, we meet full demonstrated needs, so you don't have to worry about it. And it can grind my gears, because if you're not informed, you think, oh, I'm all set, not realizing that the formula can take 46, 47, 48% of after-tax money and expect it to go to education. And that's not realistic for most families, especially if you're coming from a higher cost area or if you have kids in private school or a number of other scenarios. And so I know that what you're saying is music to a lot of people's ears, that you're sensitive to that, because it is a concern in higher ed, is both how are the most underserved having their needs met and having a campus community that can feel like home, as well as how can people in the middle, and this is not just the middle of the country, because we can look at median incomes in the middle of the country and say it's 63,000, but the middle of the student population, how can they actually afford a place like a Rochester? And there's just a lot of families like that. And it can be frustrating to them because they'll oftentimes articulate, like, I feel like I make too much to afford any need-based financial aid, but then the school expects me to come up with all of this money, and it's not just 70 or 70. Like, I got to look, that's after taxes. And so
you've got it, Mark.
So it sounds like you're sensitive to that, and it sounds like you're trying to address it.
I think at Rochester, we take a very realistic view that that it doesn't have to be either or, right? We don't have to choose only need-based aid funding or, a merit scholarship that's only going to students who come from high income families anyway and could have enrolled and afforded it already. I think we think of enrollment management and the shaping of our class as a way to intentionally provide access to a range of students' financial backgrounds and make sure that we're building the kind of incoming student cohort that we can really be proud of. There is no perfect student for Rochester. There is a perfect class that we're trying to build every year that's going to include a whole lot of different kinds of students. And that's what there's a certain point in I think anyone's admissions career where, yes, you still enjoy those one-on-one interactions and that particular standout student, but where you also start to really enjoy the artistry of creating and crafting the perfect class that will meet the institution's need and that will reflect the institution's values.
Good stuff. I feel I'd be remiss if I didn't ask something about the Eastman School and what you're doing there with the conservatory. Talk to us a little about that, because that's obviously another standout program.
Yes, the Eastman School of Music is one of the preeminent conservatories of music in the country, and the experience that those students have in Rochester is second to none, both in terms of the facilities and performance spaces, the instructors. I'm so lucky that I get to benefit, my family gets to benefit from, going to see amazing performances at Kodak Hall and being exposed to world-class musicians. This week is actually the Rochester International Jazz Festival, and there are wide ranges of luminaries from across different genres of music who are here for that, and it's really based out of the downtown campus that is the Eastman School. We also have students who are dual degree Eastman students pursuing both the true conservatory based program at Eastman plus another degree on our River campus. And I think that, again, reflects that balance and that interdisciplinary that is such a hallmark of the University of Rochester.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, I had a great interview, which you'll be hearing in a couple months, with Miljan Truelove, the VP of Enrollment at Reed College. And when I first started, I said, Miljan, what are you up to? And he's like, I'm reading this amazing book, The Agile College. And The Agile College is a recommended resource for episode 251. The Agile College is a book by Nathan Grawe. And if that sounds familiar to you, we've promoted his work heavily on this podcast. He is the author of the book Demographics and Demand for Higher Education, which is considered the preeminent book on demographic forecasting of what colleges can expect in the next decade. And this book, The Agile College, is a follow-up to that. And the subtitle is How Institutions Successfully Navigate Demographic Changes. It came out in 2021, and it'll hit you for $40. So this is not one of these $10 or $15 books, but he's a scholar, and he puts a lot of research and footnotes and documentation into his book. So what this book does is it answers the question, how can a college or a university prepare for the forecasted demographic disruptions that are inevitably coming our way? We've talked about this a lot on the podcast, but all indications are that demographic changes are going to reshape the market for the next 15 years, and colleges are already grappling with the consequences of the decline of family size due to decreased birth rates that was brought on during the Great Recession, 2007 to 2009, as well as a continuing shift toward a declining white population and an increasing student of color population. Each institution faces its own distinct challenge. There's no such thing as really a one-size-fits-all answer that's going to work for everybody. And so what Nathan Grawe does in the sequel to his great landmark book, Demographics and the Demand for Higher Education, is he explores that while it isn't possible to reverse these demographic tides, most colleges and universities, he argues, can mitigate the effects. And what he does in the book is he interviews quite a large number of higher education leaders to get their perspective. And so some of the topics that he covers includes what recruiting initiatives will work in the future, what retention programs will be effective, how can revisions be made to the academic and the co-curricular programs to appeal to more students? How do you assess your own institutional growth plans? And how can you reduce your expenses, and how can you work collaboratively? Now, that's not everything, but those are some of the main things he tackles here. And we all love a great example. I try as best as possible to give you guys examples when I'm teaching. And that's what Grawe does throughout the book. He presents readers with many examples taken from a range of institutions. And one of the things that the Agile College does is it uses data from the high school longitudinal study. And one difference between this book and his prior book is that he's incorporating a lot of new information that's occurred post the Great Recession. And he looks at his forecast here go all the way out into like to 2035, mid 2030s. And what he does is he's able to incorporate some new trends into the book, such as the rise of dual enrollment, increase in transfer students, and the role of immigration on college demand. So I can't recommend it highly enough, especially if you're into demographics and if you like scholarly books written by a Carleton College scholar. We will now return to the final part of my interview with Robert Alexander, the Dean of Admission at the University of Rochester. So, Robert, talk to me about what students are happiest about and what you feel they'd like to change. And you have access to surveys and opinion boards, and you get your feeling of the pulse of the place. Like if this was like a focus group with a bunch of, students. And
so I actually did this today in advance.
Oh, wow. Then that's how you know.
I grabbed a bunch of our summer interns and student workers and had an impromptu focus group. And, unsurprisingly, their most celebrated aspect is the flexibility and freedom.
Sure.
That when they're sitting in a class, not only are they in that class because they want to be, not because they were required to check some box, but they know every student sitting around them chose to be there. So there is no, oh, I'm in this class and taking it seriously, but everybody around me is, dozing off or not showing up. And again, that imparts this curiosity about, oh, well, why are you here? And what is your journey that you're on? And students learn from each other and then, build their own, grab another new Lego brick that they hadn't considered before after talking to one of their contemporaries about that journey. So I think they really love that flexibility and they love the curious nature that every student brings into our community. I'd also say, though, that they love that they're not doing that in a way that they have to have all the answers right away. Mm-hmm. There is some scaffolding there. They get great advising from our professional advising staff and from faculty members about how they can cultivate their interests and end up on a path that's still going to get them a degree in 4 years and a gainfully employed career pathway. So that's, I think, what they love the most. I asked them what they wanted to change, and there were a couple of quick answers like parking.
Sure.
There were.
You're not alone on that, by the way.
Yeah. There's a lot of parking. I think they're okay. They just have to walk a little bit. But I think more relevant to our conversation, the students who were a little bit older, the rising seniors, they talked about that a couple of years ago. They asked for more resources in our counseling center and our student health center, but they also said that the university really responded to that. And not only did we add more staff there, particularly around mental health counseling and wellness, But we added more staff that is more representative and diverse and reflects the diversity of our student body so they can feel more comfortable. We added a lot of additional sessions, particularly during the pandemic, but now they'll persist, into the future, for students to have sort of roundtables to talk about and receive almost some peer support around academic pressures, around depression, anxiety, those kinds of things. And there are some on the administration who I think were worried. Oh, does this mean that we're having an outsized problem with mental health on campus? I think the answer that came back was no. We're creating a culture where students are right up front and willing to utilize the services and resources and tools that we're making available, and want more of those resources. So that's a really good thing, that they're not pushing this down, hiding it, and running away from it. So I heard that from students, and I think they ultimately have seen the diversity of the student body expand so much and so quickly, but it's much harder to diversify the faculty as quickly. So I think they're looking for more diversity and representation across the faculty ranks, but they understand that, particularly with tenure and how slowly and incrementally that change has already started to take place, but that needs to continue on into the future.
So I always have to have at least one really tough question. So this is my toughie. So Rochester is known for tracking demonstrated interest and checking the students' engagement level throughout the whole process and factoring that into the admission assessments. I know you probably don't want to give away all the trade secrets, but if you were advising somebody who was applying to Rochester, what would be the things that you would say are going to be important for them to do to indicate to us that you're taking us seriously and you're not just treating us like a backup?
I love this question, and I think we're very transparent now and very upfront that we number one, you should absolutely interview. We offer Zoom-based interviews with admission staff, with current students, if that's more comfortable or engaging for you, with Rochester alumni, and taking advantage of that if and after you've really done some soul searching about why Rochester, about how this curricular flexibility would be really meaningful for you and what you'd do to optimize the opportunity that flexibility presents. That's pretty important. Demonstrating that you understand our university values and have lived out some of those values in your own life as a student and a human. Equity, leadership, integrity, openness, respect, and accountability are our Meliora values at Rochester. So we don't hide that. In fact, those are, and basically those are our Common App supplement questions, right? So we're not tracking demonstrated interest in that we care how many times you've pinged our website or how many admission events you've gone to. What we're tracking is, I would say, demonstrated thoughtfulness and intentionality about your fit and alignment with Rochester. Again, that you're not looking at Rochester because it is the best school you could get into or the backup school that, maybe in case you don't receive admission to that Ivy, but instead that Rochester is a place that will challenge you to get better and to be better, and that you're going to use the interdisciplinarity and the flexibility here to create the best fit for your academic trajectory.
Well, I loved your answer, and I love that you love that question, because it is a question that sometimes you get a little squirming when you ask it. And I love the transparency and how you embraced it and how you described and how you defined it. So time for us to start winding down, but we do have a tradition. No first-time guest ever comes on your College Bound Kid podcast without going on the hot seat for our lighter-hearted lightning round. So you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. You could have lunch or dinner with anybody alive today. Who you picking?
Lunch or dinner with anyone alive today. Gosh, that is a hot seat question.
It's not, yeah, this is the hardest part because the other stuff you get asked it every day.
Yeah, I think I'm going to sit down with Ryan Holiday, who writes the Daily Stoic and has really helped me think differently about the way that life's obstacles can be life's opportunities. I'd love to have an actual conversation, not just the one-way communication with Ryan.
Well, that's good. I wasn't expecting that one. Good stuff. You have to move from New York State to another state, but it can be any of the 50 states of the country. Where are you going?
Yeah, I think I'm going to California, or else I'm getting divorced because my wife is a fourth generation native Californian. All of her
How's she
family
handling
is,
Rochester weather? I never told you this, but I used to work for Paychex back in the mid 90s.
yeah.
And so, of course, that's one of many companies headquartered there. And we'd come to Rochester for training, and Januaries were pretty cold.
So here in Rochester, I've adopted the attitude of the Scandinavians. There is no such thing as bad weather. There's only bad clothes and bad attitudes.
There you go. That's great.
My great
But does your
Dane
wife feel
forces me
that
to
way?
get out there and take a long hike with her every morning, and we do it rain, sleet, snow. The weather here gets a bad rap. It's no worse than any other than Boston or than New York City. We get less lake effect than our wonderful sister cities, Buffalo and Syracuse. We actually have better weather than they do, and we love the four seasons. But if I had to move somewhere else, we would certainly be in California with all those cousins and aunts and uncles and sisters and brother-in-laws.
What's the worst ticket you ever got from a cop?
Oh, okay. Mine didn't even involve a cop, but on an admission trip back in probably the mid 2000s, before traffic cameras were ubiquitous, I'm driving a rental car through Los Angeles, and I'm rubbernecking, looking at the La Brea tar pits. 6 months later, I'm home, and I get this bright orange envelope in the mail that says Los Angeles County Department of Corrections.
Ouch.
And it is an expensive ticket for going through a red light with a picture of me with my hands on the steering wheel and my head turned completely 90 degrees looking at the La Brea tar pits. And that was my first exposure to a red light camera. And I think that sucker was more than $200, which,
and that was a while ago too.
Yeah.
Inflation on it, and it's worse. Somebody comes to Rochester. Where do you recommend they go out to eat?
Oh my gosh!
They're visiting your school. They want to go to a restaurant.
Yeah. My favorite is a place called Cure, Cure, and they've got amazing food. It's right off the City of Rochester Public Market, which is itself a fantastic experience. The oldest continually operational public farmers market in the country. And the produce that comes out of upstate New York and the Finger Lakes is tremendous. The wine from this region, and now tons of local craft breweries, for the parents who are listening, not the students, are just fantastic. So there's a great culinary scene here, but I'd have to shout out to Cure, which is my go-to.
Love it. So you're a sports guy. I remembered your story about Tulane and how you kind of got into admissions. What's the sport you play the best?
Well, I've gotten into CrossFit lately. My wife is a wonderful cook, and the only way to balance that out is some pretty intense physical activity. So, I see it as a lifelong sport because all the movements are scalable, whether you've got an injury or whether you're just, can't quite jump up to the height that you used to. Well, you can lower that box down and still not make excuses to get out there and move. So that's what keeps me active. And I think folks might tell you that's what keeps me sane as well.
Good stuff. All right. We're down to our last two. What's a book that you think every parent would be well served to read that's going into the college process and trying to understand it? It doesn't have to be about the college process, but just anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, I think going to think about this for a second because I've read a bunch recently.
The book questions are always hard. I usually let people throw a couple out there because you don't get to a position like you're in without reading a few books.
So for a book, I would recommend Paul Tufts' How Children Succeed. It's Grit, Curiosity, and the Hidden Power of Character.
It's a great one.
And that has a really important message about growth mindset. You can do and be better.
I got to meet him on his book tour that he was in at his most recent book in Atlanta. He's just one of those authors I feel like he's earned the right that when he releases something new, you just buy it because he really researches what he writes. He's not just shooting off editorial thoughts. Like they're very research based.
Very much. And I think he's got enough humility to know that he's not necessarily the expert. He's going to the experts and then distilling a lot of other books. When you read a Paul Tufts book, you're in essence reading 6 other books.
You really are
summarized within that one.
Yeah, the footnotes in the bibliographies are great.
Yes.
So last question is your best advice. It's a 3-parter though. Best advice to students, parents, and college counselors that are listening.
Where you go is much less important than what you do when you're there. So lean into that. There's probably no one magical, perfect college fit. There's a host of places that would be absolutely wonderful for you. So don't have a fixed mindset too early. Have a growth mindset about a range of college choices.
Well, you're preaching at the choir because we repeat that at the end of every episode. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there and when you get out of there. College is not a prize to be won, but a match to be made. That's our mantra, and nothing brings my heart more joy than when our listeners quote it back to me because I know that it's starting to seep down into their thinking. And so,
I think the pandemic was an opportunity for us collectively to maybe ease up a little bit on that college admissions arms race, and to say, you know what, it's really okay to not have a resume that is pages and pages long, but to lean into those activities and interests that are most important to you, to have a life of the mind that includes some downtime, and value just as importantly the lessons that a student is learning and internalizing from sitting with their own thoughts, from spending time with older family members or younger siblings, as it is for a student who's learned some of those same lessons maybe from being the captain of a team, or engaged in the highest level and most expensive leadership development retreat program, over their summers. That it really is about a process of learning, not a process of collecting those proverbial trophies.
Robert, this has really been fantastic. I really appreciate you and your generosity with your time. I know our listeners will as well. Tell us, if you can, not only the website, but also if there is a social media favorite or one you'd recommend students go to if they want something beyond the website to get a sense of Rochester. Give us a couple of resources for follow-up.
Sure. Well, certainly our .edu is a great place to start. But I think we're also really proud of our social media content out there that, it's fun, but it's also really reflective of an authentic Rochester experience rather than a gimmick. And that's UR Admissions on Instagram. That's a great place. I learn things about Rochester and about our student experience by being a follower and consumer of that content. So people who are a lot cooler than me are the ones putting that content out there.
Awesome. Are you plan on going to either NACAC or College Board?
I'll definitely be at NACAC in Houston, and I'm probably going to be at the ACT meeting in New Orleans later this summer as well.
Awesome. Well, listen, I'll try to connect with you at NACAC. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. We should have a great joint reception with some of our colleagues. So I'll make sure you get an invitation, Mark.
Thanks, Robert. Take care. Appreciate you.
Yeah, this is great.
Yeah, I loved it.
See you soon.
Yeah, bye now.
This Monday's episode, Mark and Susan will interview Tom Becker, the Associate Director of Admission for the University of Pittsburgh, on understanding the University of Pittsburgh. And that will be part 2 of 3.
And friends, remember, it's not where you go, but it's what you do when you get there. 4 years, maybe 5 or 6, hopefully 4. And it's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career success. See you next week, everybody.
Amen. Take care.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stylianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.